I suppose if you're a Giants fan, you have to feel good about two things, if nothing else. If nothing else. Number one, general manager Dave Gettleman, gone. Number two, almost as important, Joe Judge, head coach, gone. Like, that has to be at least somewhat helpful. I mean, because the New York Football Giants are one of the dregs of organizations in the National Football League now. They're not at Jacksonville Jag-off levels, but they're not that far off. In terms of current state, they're really, really bad. So you have to think it can't get much worse. In theory, there's nowhere to go other than plateau where you're at or go up. Or level out where you're at and go up. So getting rid of Gettleman and Judge has to feel like a bit of a win. And obviously you have the hiring of the new general manager, Joe Schoen, from the Buffalo Bills front office, who naturally, apparently, went to his old stomping grounds to bring in the next head football coach of the New York Football Giants, and that is Bills offensive coordinator Brian Daboll. Now, it probably shouldn't be much of a surprise that Schoen went with somebody he knows, he's seen up close the past few years, he's worked close with the past few years. It's maybe more interesting when you look at, let's say, the Chicago Bears and general manager Ryan Poles being hired away from the Kansas City Chiefs front office, and he went with Eberflus. He didn't even bother giving Eric Bieniemy an interview. That makes you wonder, like, what exactly is the real deal or story with Bieniemy there in Kansas City? Whereas here, it made sense. And once this hire was made at general manager, I think everybody started to realize that Brian Daboll to the Giants was probably a foregone conclusion. You might have some that said, well, maybe he'll go want to work with Tua down in Miami. Well, that's an interesting thing to look at in and of itself. He's worked with Tua. You know, when Brian Daboll was the offensive coordinator in Alabama, it was Tua that came in the second half of that national championship game against Georgia, and it was Tua that won him a national championship. So you would think, in theory, that somebody you enjoyed with success with in the past, you had an opportunity to work with them at the next level, at a new level that you've never worked at before in terms of being an NFL head coach. You might want to trust in that guy, and he said, nah, I'm good. Does that mean he really chose Daniel Jones over Tua? I don't know about that. I would certainly think not. It's probably more due to the fact of the Giants and just looking at the position of saying, hey, I could go to Miami where I have to contend with Buffalo and I have to contend with the Patriots and maybe the Jets with Zach Wilson eventually figure it out. That's a lot tougher road to hoe as opposed to here in the NFC East, you know, chances are potentially better. And then you look at the Giants and you say you have 2 picks in the top 10. You could either choose to try and work with Danny Dimes for a year or move on and go with somebody else. Bigger market size, more prestige in terms of organization. Like, from an opportunity standpoint, going to the Giants, even though they're a bit of a dumpster fire right now for sure, isn't all that bad. And you obviously have to look at this. And we talk about head coaching hires, and it's always a bit of a crapshoot. It absolutely is, especially with guys that have never been NFL head coaches before. You don't always know what you're going to get. Because the perspective changed, the role changed, it has to change. And when it doesn't, that's where some of the problems come in. But if you're a Giants fan and you look at the different coordinators that are out there, you have to look, I would think, at the work that Brian Daboll did the past 4 years with Josh Allen to take him from very talented but raw prospect requiring a lot of work to being an elite top 5 quarterback in the National Football League and looking at that Bills offense that was elite in 2021 and say, you know what, I'm at least excited about the potential of what this fucking New York Giants offense could be. Now, maybe you're a little hesitant about plucking a fruit away from the Belichick coaching tree, and I understand that. Because while you could say, well, he has experience in the Super Bowl and in big spots, and he was a part of 5 Super Bowl champions as a positional coach in New England, and that is absolutely true. Also won a national title as offensive coordinator under Nick Saban at Alabama, but again, technically a major branch or major limb of the Belichick coaching tree is Nick Saban. So that is a concern, and the history of these former Belichick guys is not good. See Joe Judge. And maybe you're looking at it and saying, yes, he's a few years removed from working for Belichick, but ultimately he is a product of the Belichick coaching tree. And that gives me some pause. See Joe Judge. And I get it. He also did work other places though as an offensive coordinator. He did it in Miami, I think it was 2011, in Kansas City in 2012. So he has a previous experience, not necessarily great experience, but he's worked outside of the dedicated Belichick coaching tree. But, you know, you look at what he's done in recent years, and you got to at least have some reason for optimism, and also the fact he's all of 46 years of age. So if you're looking for a guy that you want some stability at that position, you're looking for a guy that could potentially be there like Coughlin for a decade plus, Brian Daboll is young enough and good enough in terms of the offensive mindset and the offensive approach to the game where he could potentially be the coach of the New York Football Giants for a decade. You know, no more firing guys every 2 years. That could potentially happen. It may not. But it's not just the work with Josh Allen alone that should intrigue you if you're a Giants fan. You got to look at some of the talent there in Buffalo around Josh Allen and see some of the work that Brian Daboll did and his staff did and say they bore some really good results. Dawson Knox went from being a third-round pick out of Ole Miss that was underutilized in college to being a big-time weapon in the NFL. You know, a guy that could do some big things at the tight end position. And then Gabriel Davis, look at the performance he had in the playoffs. I mean, that was generational, you know, once-in-a-lifetime type of stuff in that divisional round game. And we'll probably largely forget about it, and that's a damn shame. But you look at the way he incorporated these weapons, the Stephon Diggses, the Gabriel Davises, you know, Cole Beasley out of the slot, Dawson Knox. Like, this was a team in the Bills that put an emphasis and priority on surrounding Josh Allen with weapons on offense and finding out a way to employ and utilize those weapons. So you might get excited about thinking of he might be able to work and do some good magic with Kadarius Toney, this past season's first-round pick. You know, if you decide to keep an Evan Engram, this is a guy at one point in time that did go to a Pro Bowl, believe it or not, but maybe he'll be able to find a way to get even more out of Evan Engram, similar to like a Dawson Knox in Buffalo. So it's got to be intriguing. You've got an offensive-minded coach with some legit NFL success. He took a raw talent like Josh Allen and helped mold him into an elite NFL quarterback. And whether you think you're crazy and think that Danny Dimes could be that, or you look at them potentially drafting somebody this year or next year and saying, hey, I want Daboll to work with him, I totally understand that. Like, that's a reason for some type of excitement. And at least I'll say this for the Giants. At least you're plucking the fruit from a team that actually made a playoff appearance this year, that actually had that unit, in this case the Bills offensive unit, that was Super Bowl worthy. They absolutely were. The defense took a shit dive at the worst possible moment, which is why Leslie Frazier isn't a finalist for any head coaching job. But when you look at that offense and what they did, it's why Brian Daboll ultimately did still get an NFL head coaching job. So at least you could say you've got a top-level offensive coordinator that actually oversaw an elite offense for one of the elite teams in the NFL. You're not bringing in somebody that was a second or third tier mind, second or third tier performance with their unit for a team that didn't make the damn playoffs. At least you have that. So I'm curious what Giants fans think about this. Like, this probably has to be about the best you could have done. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean that when you look at all of the things you could have, maybe you say, well, you go after a Harbaugh, but was that really going to be realistic? I don't know if Harbaugh was ever going to want to coach in New York for a variety of reasons. Maybe you say a Doug Peterson. Yes, he won a Super Bowl and could have been a consideration, but no head coach has ever won Super Bowl titles with two different teams. There's that history. Doesn't mean it can't happen. Just, you know, you look at Daboll and you look at the work with Josh Allen and you say, man, he turned that Buffalo Bills offense into a legit unit, an elite unit, and the quarterback, Josh Allen, into an elite quarterback. Now, if you made this hire solely as the Giants because you believe in Danny Dimes and you think he's going to be the dude, then you're fucking crazy. What I'd like to think is that this is Joe Schoen saying, I worked enough with Daboll the past 4 years. I know what he can do. I know what he represents. I know what he brings to the table. I think he's the right guy for the job. And when we figure out how we want to build the New York Giants and build the New York Giants offense, it's going to be Daboll calling the shots. It's going to be Daboll putting this offense in the best possible situation to succeed. So I personally like this hire quite a bit for the Giants. Who knows how this plays out in a couple of years? It could go south. Danny Dimes will suck, and then they don't find the right quarterback to replace him. Like, there's a lot of factors at play here. But I think if you look at the factors, you have to at least consider this hiring made a lot of sense. Probably as much sense as any hire that the Giants could have possibly made, especially once they made the decision at general manager. If that guy feels comfortable enough in Daboll, then there has to at least be something there. And at least you have no doubt that the general manager chose his head coach. And now they get to work for a team that needs a whole hell of a lot of work.